What I saw in Guatemala was people loving their city. I don't know. It was this idea that you can love a city into greatness. It was
Hmm.
I really gained this understanding, this idea that places are like people, and over time, they begin to bear the marks of the ones who love it.
Welcome to More Than Profit, the podcast where values, vision, and capital converge. Produced by Access Ventures, this show spotlights the leaders and innovators redefining success, not just through financial returns, but by the impact they create. Every episode dives into the inspiring stories, bold ideas, and hard-won lessons of those who are leveraging capital, financial, intellectual, and social, for equity, sustainability, and systematic change. Whether you're an investor, entrepreneur, or purpose-driven professional, we are here to challenge the status quo, push the boundaries of traditional investing, and inspire you to align your resources with your values. Join us as we explore how capital can be a force for meaningful change.
Recently, I've been thinking about how often systems aren't necessarily broken, but they're at times doing exactly what they were designed to do. Now, I know that sounds simple, almost cynical, but what if we took that seriously? What if we looked at the systems that we move through, education, capital, neighborhoods, and asked, who are they built for? Who do they leave out? And how do we begin to design something different? Well, that's the kind of question that Justin Beene has been asking for most of his life. Justin grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan in what he describes as two worlds, a black father and a white mother, a working-class urban neighborhood, and a private Christian school. In many ways, he spent his life integrating those experiences, not just personally, but structurally. Faith and entrepreneurship, social work and systems change, community trauma and collective vision. Justin is the founder of Grand Rapids Center for Community Transformation, and in this conversation, he walks us through how he's using real estate, capital, and relationships to reshape how cities function and who they serve. He's developing a new kind of model for community transformation, one that's local, networked, financially regenerative, and deeply relational. And what I love about this conversation is that it doesn't stop at critique. It asks, what's possible when we stop treating broken systems as inevitable and start treating people, neighborhoods, and capital as deeply interconnected?
Yeah, so, my father was one of 12. They actually originally from Tupelo, Mississippi, and then moved up to, I believe, Benton Harbor, Battle Creek, settled in Grand Rapids. My grandfather was a Pentecostal pastor and also bivocational, had a construction company, and he hired intentionally from a lot of folks in the neighborhood and returning citizens. On my mother's side, she also had an entrepreneurial father who had a small optical business that he grew over time. And she was white, he was black. My mom in the late 70s, I believe, moved into a communal home. And these kind of young people put their money together in a pot and protested stuff. And I don't know, it's somewhat of an activist, I guess. But she met my father, who was living in this kind of urban neighborhood. And I say out of that, they got these 5 mixed kids who were all passionate about faith, about entrepreneurship, about community. And so I grew up not far from where they originally met, in a poor neighborhood in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in the 80s, where there was for sure all of the things that people can think about in a poor urban neighborhood around crime and poverty and prostitution and lots of kind of drugs and drug trafficking in and around the neighborhood I grew up in. But my grandparents, my mom's side, paid for us to go to private schools. And so I had this very interesting kind of dynamic of being, what I say in many ways, in two worlds of kind of private Christian education and all of the access that brought in terms of the names that I was around, and yet rooted in this urban community that was struggling with things, and even my family. And so I think that upbringing and the exposure I had to different things always made me highly interested in how to integrate these different things. Faith, work, economics, entrepreneurship, philanthropy was kind of always the way or lens that I kind of saw the world. And I think I started in social work, working with young people who were aging out of the foster care system. And going to school for social work, I said it was a great baseline for me to understand families and systems. I think what frustrated me was that the courses and my practicums didn't include entrepreneurship, or it didn't include faith. And so after my master's degrees in social work, I ended up going to seminary because I really wanted to kind of learn how to speak the theological language to discuss things in my community. And from there, went on to think about business and study leadership, and then how all of those things integrated. So it's been a journey and continuing to learn along the way.
I love your upbringing, but I am curious because you've talked about this a lot, and you and I've connected in various circumstances. You've talked about this kind of living in two worlds. I have to imagine when you're growing up and you're a teenager, because I have three of them right now, and you have a couple. What was that like? What did that feel like in the midst of it? Like, were there times where you resented that kind of duality of living and in your experiences, or were you always appreciative of what you receive from both sides of the family in that regard? Or was it ever just kind of weird and awkward to kind of be never really, in some senses, feel settled in either world?
No, that's a great question, great insight, I would say. I think for any person trying to figure out your identity, right, that was a wrestle. I mean, I remember many Sundays we kind of had our family meetings, and it was like the topic of race and economics and identity and belonging.
Hmm.
It was never packaged in that way. It was more like me or my brothers wrestling with being called a racial slur,
Hmm.
or trying to figure out, and in many ways, we weren't Black enough for the Black kids. We weren't white enough for the white kids. We were seen as people of color, but yet in our neighborhood, because we owned our own home and we had a basketball hoop, we were kind of seen as privileged because kids recognized, well, although we had one car, we had a car. My
Hmm.
dad had a job. And so we were protected in that way of, we grew up in poverty, but we weren't stuck. We had options. We were economically mobile. We had access. And yet, in comparison to what we were experiencing in a private Christian school, we had very little
Hmm.
and were embarrassed by that, I think, at times. I think everyone wrestled with it in their own way,
Yeah.
in terms of how they chose their friends or the path that they went on. I think now I see it as, gosh, this was an incredible way to have experienced the world. But yeah, at times there was a lot of pain and probably loneliness that for sure I felt.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like too, you kind of picked up the mantle, so to speak, of your parents' activism, community interest, and just awareness of the lived experience of the people around you. Because I think so many people just wander through life and don't even acknowledge the pain of those around them. But you pursued a bachelor's and then a master's in social work. Were there critical moments like, okay, great, you've had this formative lived experience living in two worlds in a sense, but were there moments where you remember, okay, I'm going to step further into this, and like, I'm going to make it my life's work? Because you could have said, hey, that was great, and I have a great appreciation for my experience and what I've done, but you could have gone on to finance and gone into banking or investments. And were there moments where you're like, yep, this is for me, and I have a sense of responsibility to say something, do something?
Yeah, there was probably a lot of those along the way, right? As you move from one thing to the next thing. I remember being in seminary, I had one of my professors say, wow, you're a really good writer. And I was like, oh, okay. Like it was an affirmation. It's like writing some confession or something. He said, there's not a lot of people who actually have the chops, who have your lived experience, who can go get a doctorate or a PhD. He
Hmm.
said, but you're one of them. And he said, you should seriously consider that. I remember that being a moment, like it was an invitation into both an affirmation of who I was, but then continue to go deeper. And I think that pushed me. For sure, there was a time I left with my wife and my 6-month-old at the time, kind of burned out from working in complex systems. We moved to Guatemala City, and I was studying kind of business and leadership and principles of business to change a city and working with nonprofits and businesses there. It was this super transformative experience for me to be outside of my own context and watching other leaders. When you're outside of your own context, your senses are more aware,
Hmm.
right? You're thinking, you're seeing, you're smelling, you're experiencing everything as a visitor, which sometimes you take for granted in your own backyard. And so experiencing this place of, to some extent, me going, and I was doing some consulting work thinking, you're always going to do something to help folks. And really it being this opportunity to see how people were seeking to love their city, seeking to make a transformative impact in their city, from my perspective, appeared to be little financial resources.
Hmm.
And so I think it felt like this call to what not are you going to do here in Guatemala? What are you going to do and take from these local leaders? What are you going to bring back to your own city? What is the thing? You've seen the deep challenges and problems, but you also have access to resources that many other people don't. It became an affirmation in many ways of my positionality in the world as a gift and a calling
Hmm.
to say, I'm supposed to go back to my city and I'm supposed to do something.
Wow.
And so that was probably 2013 that I think I was working in these different spaces, but I don't know if I had a clear vision of what I was supposed to do. And I think that period of time of deep reflection and challenge gave me a greater vision of what it meant to fall in love with a place.
Yeah, that's good. Well, and I think it's interesting, and I appreciate you sharing the kind of the burnout and kind of withdrawal to another place, and because I think the work of the deep work, the transformative work that's needed in local communities is hard. And it comes with a lot of opinions from neighbors and friends and relatives that don't maybe see progress in the same way that you do, or opportunity, or the needs, or even the way we respond. I definitely can appreciate, like, okay, I need to go do something else. But then that calling back to your community and saying, okay, I need to do something here. Why do you think, help me understand from your perspective, just obviously having been to Guatemala and the work that you've done in Grant, why do you think it's important to focus in these kind of local communities? Why is that something that I think is missing oftentimes as we look at community transformation and systems thinking? I find a lot of people kind of leveling up and not going as deep and intentionally as and integrated as you are in what you're doing in Grand Rapids. Why do you think it's important that we kind of call people back to that sense of local place?
You know, it's interesting because it's like I don't know if I could say that I love my city
Hmm.
in 2012, 2013. I had experienced some pretty significant challenges, I think, here, whether it was fully trying to fit in, whether it was run-ins with the police, whether it was, for some reason, even me being lighter skinned, the amount of racism, racial slurs, and challenges that I had, pretty significant stuff that in many ways did just kind of want to leave
Hmm.
this city. I was frustrated with it. And what I saw in Guatemala was people loving their city. And I don't know, it was this idea that you can love a city into greatness.
Hmm.
I really gained this understanding, this idea that places are like people, and over time, they begin to bear the marks of the ones who love it. Or the G.K. Chesterton quote of, Rome wasn't great, and then people loved it. People loved it,
And it became
and then it
great.
became great. right? And so it's this idea of you have to understand the fullness of a place to truly love it, to understand its pain and its hope, to understand its heart. And I think I had a unique position to say, well, what should the city of Grand Rapids look like? What should my community look like? I think the reality of if I left my city, if I left my neighborhood with the access, privilege, education that I had, then who would love it?
Hmm.
If I followed suit and left the city for better opportunity, then both my families being rooted here, what is the miss that I'm going to have? And what example am I setting? And so I think again, part of that deeper settling into what is my calling was to embrace the fullness of the hope of what our city could be while experiencing the pain of what our city is to understand the heartbeat of our city.
Hmm.
And I think that is so important for, again, fully integrating, allowing myself to see the pains of our city and not just seeking to save it, seeing the hopes of our city and seeking not just to consume it, but understanding the fullness of it and wanting to cultivate a culture and a neighborhood in which people can embrace the fullness of it.
Hmm.
And I think allowing the city to be a classroom in which it teaches you, in which it's made me now more fully alive, fully integrated, and able to understand other places and the role and of context on people's lives. But then also it being an organism, like communities are not this static thing that you can't change. Like you can mobilize people, you can start businesses, you can create collaborations, you can make investments, and you can change cities, you can change neighborhoods. And so trying to see it as an opportunity has been, what I've spent the last 15 years really trying to do.
That's great. The idea of cities or systems, we're kind of in a complex network of systems. Well, you've said before that systems aren't broken, that they're producing kind of exactly what they're designed to do, right? And so when you think about, okay, a city's not necessarily broken, as we think about Grand Rapids in the future, it's doing exactly what it's designed to do. How does that kind of statement that you've made in the past, how does that influence your approach to innovation? And then that kind of leads us into kind of what you are now building through the Grand Rapids Center for Community Transformation. How's that a North Star, if you will, as you think about integration and community and impact and greatness?
It's been interesting over the past many years. I've always fallen into trying to both name some principles, right? Like I would say make observations, name some principles, and then activate those principles. I would say as of recent, there's been a lot of trying to develop some type of model or framework or new type of system that has learned from the existing system, because in many ways, the system in Grand Rapids or many other places, whether it's the capitalist system, whether it's the welfare system, it might be working for 70% of the people, right? I mean, like many people in the city are doing fantastic. There's a 20, 30% who the system is not working for them. So there's both okay, well, the system to some extent is working, and then in other ways it isn't. And so we have to innovate within that to some extent. I think one of the principles in my dissertation is both working with and confronting systems. I think you have to do both. I've been finding myself trying to develop frameworks that invite the system into this new way of being, invite the players within a system. So I'll like an example would be we have a lot of entrepreneurial support organizations that exist in Grand Rapids. And there's lots of philanthropy going into them. There's lots of people working to kind of support many small businesses. But the incentives are wrong. They're not really encouraged to work with one another. Sometimes funders kind of just give to multiple ones without trying to get them to share information. And so what happens is there becomes lots of duplication. We've all been a part of it ourselves. And so we said, well, I think we've been asking the wrong question. I think we need to ask, what does the entrepreneur need? Not what does the organization provide? And by doing that, we created a framework that says, well, all entrepreneurs need access to capital, they need contracts or customers, they need connections and relationships, and they need capacity or business capacity, legal, finance, HR. And so we said, wonder if we create this model. We now call it the four corners of support or the 4C framework. And we've invited all of the entrepreneurial support organizations to join us and saying, hey, what's the corner that you support this entrepreneur? And we're beginning to share information and we're beginning to place a person, not the name of an organization, but a person from the ESO in a corner
Hmm.
to support that entrepreneur. And we've hired some portfolio managers who are then bringing essentially that team of supports as an advisor, almost as an ad hoc advisory group to begin to regularly walk. So we're finally getting these ESOs to work together. And I say that's been what I have found to be the most helpful. It's what the Center for Community Transformation is. It's almost a new North Star for multiple organizations and businesses to work together. And it embraces the complexity of the system, but it innovates within it in a new way that I think people need to experience or be demonstrated something that is different. And so, yeah, that's the way I've been thinking about how to leverage what exists and innovate.
That's great.
Each year, about 3.5 million young people in America graduate high school and step into adulthood, surrounded by family, guidance, and support. But for 20,000 of them, those aging out of foster care, that transition is far more uncertain. No parents to call, no safety net to fall back on, just a world that expects them to figure it out alone. At Access Ventures, we believe that behind every statistic is a story. Fracture to Flourish is our new podcast series that amplifies those stories. In our first series, Aging Out, we sit with those who've lived it and those working to change the system. What does it really take to support a young adult in that transition? And how do we shift from survival to stability, from fracture to flourishing? Listen to the entire first season now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you have an example? Because I think sometimes people hear systems and their brains for some reason just shut off because it's just, they took a biology class and it freaks them out when they get to that chapter in anatomy and they're like, oh my gosh, complex systems. Can you give us a person? I'm sure there's someone that's been a part of the work that you're doing at the Center for Community Transformation that helps give us a picture of how that lived out really has impacted the future of their family and their community.
We call it an opportunity called Youth Build here. And it takes students 18 to 24 who have dropped out of high school. We had a student in particular who had dropped out of high school, was homeless or facing homelessness. We were able to get them into this kind of program. It's a 7-month program where you help them get a GED. We teach them the trades. They get OSHA, CPR, first aid certified. They learn how to build a home. One of his dreams was to build his own home. And after he graduated, he got a job at a construction company and had worked there for a number of years. At some point, he said, I've saved enough money. I'd like to build my own home. And we were able to help him secure a piece of land. And the students from 4 or 5 years kind of after he graduated, the next cohort actually helped him build a home.
Wow.
And so he now lives there with his son. It doesn't mean that everything in his life is peachy, but his life engaged a bunch of different systems. And oftentimes we don't understand systems because they're kind of designed for us and we're able to navigate them without a bunch of complexity. But for him, he experienced the homelessness system. He experienced the social service system. He experienced the marketplace system with his employment. He also experienced a social network of companies and project managers and our landscape company that all stepped up to support him. And so oftentimes the system, you don't know that the system is benefiting you because you're like a fish in water until you run up to the challenge of the system wasn't designed to help you solve that. And I think that's oftentimes what we find, whether it's working with an entrepreneur, whether it's working with a young person, whether it's working to try to do something innovative in the workforce development system, is you realize, oh, at the center of this system is probably not the job seeker, the entrepreneur, the homeless young person. It's actually more designed around the organization, designed around the funder, designed around the legislation. And I think it's recentering all of these systems, or at least the innovation for me is recentering the person at the center of the work.
Hmm. Well, and I know in the last year or so, I think your focus has kind of personally, as you're thinking about systems and changing and refocusing on the human centered kind of approach, you've actually started looking at how capital itself is flowing and capital is structured because you see that as kind of fundamental to a functioning ecology or community. Can you help us understand? Like, 'cause you've studied it kind of like basically from Master of Social Work all the way up through a doctorate in leadership transformation and business and entrepreneurship. Why are money flows so important? And what are you seeing as some of the opportunities that we have in these local communities to really affect change if we rethink how the system of money is operating?
I feel like everything seems to be, it's revolved around capital, right? I mean,
Hmm.
it is whatever system, it needs capital to go into the system to make it go around. I think in the nonprofit sector, it's like the dollars flow and what's left at the end of the program is a counseling session, a tutoring session, a financial literacy course, a whatever. And I say there's been lots of studies that kind of look at a particular urban neighborhood, say like the one I live in. And the majority of any programmatic budget is made up 50% or more of salaries. That's what tends to be the largest bulk of the expense. And then, so most of the money goes in to support a low income neighborhood. But what happens is people who are working in that neighborhood don't tend to live there. And so they get their paycheck and then they go spend their money outside of that neighborhood. They go bank somewhere else. They grocery shop somewhere else. They get their cars fixed somewhere else. So all of the money is going, it comes in, but flows right back out. And so it makes it extremely difficult, I say, to invest in these urban neighborhoods because there is no circulation of the dollar. And my neighborhood, and the hopes, like any other neighborhood, is that you have flourishing businesses in which people live and work, invest. They take care of their yard, they buy from the local store, whatever. But in urban neighborhoods, there tends to be more nonprofits, more churches, more social service systems. And so it's not just creating income for a household. I think it's looking at what are wealth creating engines for a neighborhood, things that can continue to spit off revenue or excess profit within a community that benefit a community. And so a lot of the work now is thinking about it from a place-based perspective of how do you get capital to flow in a way that can stay locally. And that takes a different economic way of thinking, of reallocating capital in a different way, because there's an inefficiency essentially in the market, right? Whether it's with entrepreneurs, whether it's with housing, the full kind of marketplace hasn't taken hold. And so there's a gap, I think, in which you need some of these programs or social services, or you need philanthropy to play a role, but it's understanding the role that it can play should be temporary and should spur something else. So that's been a lot of the ways that I've been thinking about
And
systems. And maybe,
you have a really interesting, I
yeah,
think, model that you're working on. Do you care to
yeah,
share
I
some
think
about it?
that yeah, the example, we're in the process of redeveloping an old abandoned Heinz pickle factory. It's been abandoned for almost 30 years. And it's going to be ultimately a center for entrepreneurship and innovation, a place where a lot of the entrepreneur support organizations, venture capital, private equity, investors, even schools of business can be housed in this one location where essentially I mentioned that social network that can help entrepreneurs navigate some of these complex systems can actually be in a particular place and done in a relational way. And so the question is, well, if we invest in this building and more investment comes, how does that then not create gentrification for the neighbors who live here? their property taxes may go up or they get pushed out with the rent. And so I think the question is, investment's already happening. Can you create a new mechanism in which legacy residents can actually benefit from that investment? And so the capital stack is really interesting. It's about a $20 million project. We're using a crowdfunding platform that we're going to allow local residents to invest in this project. And ultimately, it's combined with new market tax credit, state appropriations, philanthropy, state dollars, local city brownfield dollars to create a unique capital stack. But ultimately, the building will be owned 51% by this crowdfunding entity made up of smaller resident investors that will then spit off for years to come dividend checks to local residents. So as far as we know, it's going to be one of the first ones that's kind of to scale, that's mixing a new market tax credit deal with crowdfunding. So we're super excited about all of the attorneys who have put in a bunch of work to help us reimagine and affirm that it is possible. So again, it's leveraging the existing systems,
Yep.
putting them together in a new way. And we're super excited about the opportunities that it will create, not just for this community, but potentially as a model for other cities or other developments to reimagine how we can do investment that actually benefits the local community.
I love that. What are your thoughts? I'm sure you think about this a lot, but like around leadership and leadership development specifically in this space, because I'm thinking about all of the things that you're doing, and I have to imagine there's not another Justin Beene yet in Grand Rapids that understands the complexity of these systems and the need and the opportunity of integration as it pertains to faith, work, life, community, family, capital. What does it look like and what's needed in order for more young people to be exposed to some of these narratives and experiences? What's lacking in our system of education? And how could we begin to actually help people pursue this more without having to go get four degrees in very different fields? But man, because what I would love is more Justin Beenes and another Justin Beene in Grand Rapids that can pick up that mantle when you're done doing the work you're doing. So what it's needed in the area of education and leadership and kind of just thoughtful, kind of human-centered approaches to how we think about next generation.
One is I do think there are lots of people in every community who have within them kind of this library of wisdom, right? Lived experience, educational experiences. They might not always be given the platform, right? Or they might not want to public speak, or they may not have been provided the same opportunities. It does make me feel a certain level of like obligation, right? That other people may not feel. There's a conviction and passion that I do think I have that hopefully is of value. But I think part of my role for sure is to then galvanize, utilizing the relationships I have to try to bring people together and try to facilitate these different types of experiences. We've really reversed engineered our model, and it goes back in many ways to leadership. We say, in many ways, whatever the result is, the outcome you want to see in your city, in your community, and business, we tend to then go, well, in order to get that result, we need to be more strategic or innovate in whatever system, right? Like we've been talking about. But I say really underneath that strategic action, it tends to be a set of belief systems or some vision for what's possible. And then based on that vision you tend to act to lead to a certain result. And underneath a belief system that we all have or vision for the future really lies in experience or lack of experience. And underneath every set of experiences actually is a set of relationships or lack of relationships. And so everything that we do now, we call it our relationships to results model, is to engage people in relationships with people across political difference, religious, economics, bringing them together in authentic ways so that they can create a new experience. Similar to me of living in two worlds, how do you cultivate the networks I have with other business networks to mobilize the church community to engage in community or with business and bringing people together in really concrete ways to get them to dream then about what's possible. As you get to know people who are different from you, as you hear their experiences, as you see what's possible, you start to dream bigger. You start
Hmm.
to have this collective North Star that allows you to be more strategic with how we behave, that allows us to get to a different set of results. All of that to me is actually leadership development. You can't be a great leader. A prerequisite to that is even self-knowledge. And you don't even know sometimes who you are until you're around people who are different from you. We tend to live in our own containers. We take the same path to work every single time. We tend to do the same type of things on the weekends. We tend to hang out with the same types of friends. Our worlds are actually fairly small relationally, if we're honest with ourselves, even though we have a breadth of knowledge that we watch on TV.
Hmm.
And so trying to get people to get relationships that are outside of their box that challenge them in the right way, I think is a way that we do. And I could share a bunch of stories, but we do this thing called cocktails and cross pollination. Me and another local business leader who came from two very different worlds regularly, actually once a month, bring together different networks. And we just, over time, we've done 15 of these. We've hosted over 15 events with 500 people. We started asking them, has it changed your belief system about our city or about the people in it? Over 70% of people say, I've met an average of 8 new people. I followed up with 5 of them, and it's changed my perception of the city. And we said,
Wow.
well, is it leading to anything strategic? So great, you're building relationships, and we have cocktails and cross-pollination. And actually 37% of people said that it actually is making them, they either made an investment, received an investment, or did some type of joint venture or program together. So it's actually working, is that we're getting people to think differently and behave differently. That's leading to, I think now we say over 5,223 different meaningful relationships and connections in
Wow.
this world. So I'd say that's one big picture thing that we do. I think another thing is you can always develop a new business or scale your business or scale some program faster than you can develop leaders. And that takes lots of intentionality. So we have created a more formalized process in which we call it tech transformational executive coaching. It's a 2-year formative process where we're asking leaders across business, nonprofit, and the faith community really a certain set of questions to have them be formed in a way that helps them not just be better executives, but helps them be transformative executives. And I think there's a difference between someone who can produce a good product and make a profit in their business and someone who is fully integrated and can lead from places of humility, recognize their own pain or trauma, and when they're living out of that, who are seeking the peace and prosperity of their employees and the community around them. That has been a joy. We've taken over 70 leaders kind of through this 2-year process, usually in groups of 10 to 15. And seeing the transformation happen in leaders as you get them to reflect on their childhood, as you get them to reflect on pain, as you get them to celebrate the joys, which oftentimes executive leaders don't know how to do. We just keep going, 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 but to really celebrate what has happened and to do it in context with other leaders, creating that place where you can be, I think, courageous and be challenged across people of difference. Again, really living into that relationships to results model has been a more formal way in which we've tried to really develop leaders.
That's great. So, Justin, as we close, if you're successful in the work that you're doing, and I say you because I know you have a team and I know you're working with lots of different organizations and people that care about Grand Rapids and seeing it flourish. But if you're successful, what does that look like? What does that mean for the people of your family, in your community, the folks that you work with? What does that look like? Give us a picture of a view of the power and the equity and the leadership that would exist in Grand Rapids if you're successful.
Well, I think you're right. One is there's an extremely talented team behind me, with me, challenging me. I always say I get to be on podcast or interviews or whatever and be the face of it. But the reality is there are people who are doing the work day to day. And in many ways, I got to keep getting out of the way for a lot of my leaders. I think it's casting a big vision and getting people to aggressively pursue it. But they are people who are subject matter experts and who have experiences in business operational mind that I don't have. And so part of it is creating culture, and a culture that outlives any particular personality. So when I walk into a leadership meeting or a team meeting and I see people modeling something that was kind of idea that I had that still sustains today, or that's going deeper or challenging people, I think, at least from an organizational perspective, that's where I see great beauty. When I look at an extremely diverse group of people who are less concerned about seeking consensus or ensuring that everyone believes exactly the same thing, but people who have learned to coexist and function around a vision for the city that requires all of us to love it in our different ways. I think success is, we've been saying, a culture where it's normal for everyone to thrive and prosper. There's probably not a lot of people who grew up in one of the poorest zip codes in Grand Rapids who's been able to kind of, figuratively speaking, get to where I've gotten. So it's abnormal for someone who looks like me to have a master's degree and a doctorate degree. But I think we want to make it normal for that to happen, that I'm not the exception, I'm the norm. That our culture, our community is spitting out excellent leaders who aren't just on the ground, but making it to boardrooms, who are running businesses, who are being folks who are allocating the capital. I've said when the philanthropists are giving back to the community they grew up in, when it's not some outside philanthropist, but it's actually people who grew up there who are writing the checks, becomes a really important thing. When Grand Rapids has so much great things about it, one of the best mid-sized cities, or one of the best places to raise a family, or Beer City, USA, all of these things that over the years we've been hailed, but really only for a certain segment of the people. And we've been saying we want to make the headlines true for everyone, not just 70%. And so we've been asking this question that we're tracking over time. And the question is, do you believe that this is your city? And I think it's reinstilling hope. I think if we can get that number in poor urban communities to increase, that people have a sense of belonging, that this is their city, and they feel like they're economically mobile. They feel like I have relationships and connections, and there's a pathway for me to move up and out. And there's a network who's supporting. There's a city and community that's supporting me. And all of that's going to require, I think there's a consultant that we were working with, and he was like, I just don't get how in the world you ever see this happening.
Nah.
And I said, without humility and trust, it won't.
Yeah.
If people run to their corners and say, well, that's too progressive of idea, or that's too whatever, it is calling everyone to come out of their camps and come into a new camp, a third way of thinking, being, and doing. That requires us being non-rivalistic. It requires us being focused on an abundance mentality, that there is enough. We have to reimagine it. And it's moving out of just thinking about it to doing stuff, being practical, engaging people. I say grassroots and grass tops. We need everybody at the table to do something different.
There's a moment towards the end of this conversation that stuck with me. Justin says, cities are like people. Over time, they begin to bear the marks of the ones who love them. And that feels essential to what he's doing in Grand Rapids. He's not just launching programs. He's cultivating a culture, one where place matters, where belonging matters, where capital doesn't just extract, but it circulates. And where transformation isn't about fixing broken people, but reimagining the systems that have shaped their lives. We also talk about leadership, what it means to lead in a way that's integrated, that draws from both pain and hope, and what it looks like to pass that forward, not just through professional development, but through the kind of relational architecture that allows others to step in, to build on, and to carry forward the work. If Justin's work resonates with you or challenges you, I'd love for you to share this episode. And if you're building something similar in your own city, send me a note. These conversations are meant to provoke reflection, but also connection. You can find links to Justin's work and the Center for Community Transformation in the show notes. As always, thanks for listening. Today's episode of More Than Profit was hosted by me, Bryce Butler. Our executive producer is Crystal Esquivel. Our associate producers are Bryn McKay and Bailey Pendleton. Graphics design is by Justin Esquivel, and audio production assistance is provided by Resonate Recording.
Thanks for tuning in to More Than Profit, a podcast produced by Access Ventures. We hope today's conversation inspired you to think differently about how values, vision, and capital can create meaningful change. To stay up to date, make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. While you're there, we'd love if you left a review to help others find the show. Visit us at www.accessventures.org/podcast for additional content and past episodes. You can also join the conversation by following us on Twitter at ACS Ventures. I'm Bryn McKay, and you've been listening to More Than Profit, a production of Access Ventures. See you next time.